Imagine a world where ambition and manipulation overshadow morality, where a man stops at nothing to achieve power, leaving devastation in his path. This is the world of Richard III, one of William Shakespeare's most fascinating tragedies. The play invites us into the dark mind of Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who is born into the turbulence of the Wars of the Roses, a civil war in England between the York and Lancaster families. From the very beginning, Richard reveals his bitterness and thirst for power. With his opening line, "Now is the winter of our discontent, made glorious summer by this son of York," Richard grabs the audience's attention. He is a master manipulator, skilled in deceit and charm. But beneath his wit and silver tongue lies a heart consumed by envy and greed. The central question the play explores is whether Richard's villainy is a result of his deformity and circumstances, or whether he chooses to embrace his dark path. As the story unfolds, we witness Richard's rise to power, his bloody reign, and his eventual downfall. The play is not just about a power-hungry king. It is about the corrupting influence of ambition, the clash between fate and free will, and the moral decay that comes with the pursuit of unchecked power. Now we'll discuss the summary of the play. The play opens with Richard, Duke of Gloucester, standing alone on stage and addressing the audience directly in a famous soliloquy. Here, Richard reveals his bitterness towards his family's peace and his desire to disrupt it. He resents his physical deformity, describing himself as rudely stamped, and believes that his circumstances have excluded him from the worth and heroism of court life. Rather than retreating into bitterness, Richard vows to make the world feel his rage by becoming the villain. Richard's first move is to create a scapegoat in his brother Clarence, who has been imprisoned in the Tower of London. Richard uses a prophecy that someone with a name starting with G will endanger the throne, and he manipulates circumstances to ensure Clarence is arrested, because Clarence's first name is George. Clarence's murder, though implied rather than shown, sets the stage for the bloody actions to come. Meanwhile, Richard begins courting Lady Anne despite having killed her husband and father-in-law. In a remarkable display of manipulation, Richard uses his charisma to convince Anne to marry him despite her grief and hatred towards him. His ability to persuade her shows the extent of his charm and guile, even though his intentions are purely self-serving. Now let's dive deeper into one of Richard's most skillful manipulations, the way he convinces Lady Anne to marry him. Picture this scene. Lady Anne enters, still grieving for her murdered relatives, and in walks Richard. He doesn't attempt to justify his actions right away, but instead feigns regret, pretending to mourn the deaths that he himself caused. His approach is very calculated. Rather than acting like a typical villain, he presents himself as a victim of circumstance. He appeals to her emotions, using her own grief against her, making her feel that they share a common sorrow. Richard's charm and ability to twist the situation are at their peak here. Richard does not just manipulate through words, he uses her vulnerability. Complimenting her beauty and claiming that his violence was done out of a desperate desire to win her love, Richard turns the narrative on its head, making her almost feel that she should pity him. As a result, despite her initial hatred, Lady Anne slowly begins to waver, and by the end of the scene, Richard has managed to secure her consent for marriage, all while continuing to deceive and manipulate her into thinking he has some moral high ground. This moment showcases the depth of Richard's cunning and how he uses every tool at his disposal, grief, flattery, and false remorse, to get what he wants. Meanwhile, as King Edward IV's health declines, Richard sees an opportunity to exploit the political instability. King Edward, who has worked to reconcile the varying factions of the court, is unable to do so in his final days. Richard capitalizes on this by poisoning the already delicate relations between Queen Elizabeth's family and the king. When Edward dies, Richard immediately begins plotting his next move, eliminating the young prince, Edward IV's sons, to remove any threat to his claim to the throne. With the young prince imprisoned in the tower, Richard's machinations intensify. He convinces the court that the princes are illegitimate and that he is the rightful heir to the throne. In a stunning display of political manipulation, Richard initially pretends to reject the crown, but he ultimately reluctantly accepts it, signaling his complete rise to power. Now, Richard has ascended the throne as Richard III, but his reign is built on lies, deceit, and murder. Once Richard is crowned the king, his rule quickly turns tyrannical. He orders the murder of his nephews, the two young princes, to ensure no one challenges his claim. The princes are never seen again, but it is heavily implied that they are murdered in the Tower of London. This brutal action cements Richard's status as a cold-blooded ruler. Richard's paranoia begins to show. He orders the execution of his former ally, Buckingham, after Buckingham expresses reluctance to continue supporting Richard's increasingly brutal rule. Richard's reign, built on treachery, begins to unravel as his allies start to desert him. Richard's paranoia and guilt reach their peak in Act 4. He is increasingly haunted by the ghosts of those he has killed, including his brother Clarence, his wife Anne, and others. These ghosts appear to him before the final battle, cursing him and reminding him of his crimes. His reign, which was once so secure, is now riddled with fear and doubt. Richard's enemies begin to unite against him. Queen Elizabeth, the widow of King Edward IV, aligns herself with Henry Tudor, the Earl of Richmond, who is now the leader of the Lancaster faction. With Richmond's growing power, Richard faces his greatest challenge yet: the forces of righteousness and justice gathering against him. The final scene sees Richard preparing for the decisive Battle of Bosworth. As the battle looms, Richard is plagued by vision of the ghosts of those he has murdered. Each ghost curses him, and the final curse is delivered by the ghost of Lady Anne, who wishes for Richard's downfall. The ghosts also bless Richmond, signaling the divine justice that awaits Richard. In the heat of battle, Richard, still defiant, cries out, a horse, my kingdom for a horse." In his desperate attempt to flee, he is killed by Richmond, who becomes Henry VII. Richmond's victory brings an end to Richard's bloody reign and unites the houses of York and Lancaster through his marriage to Elizabeth of York, the daughter of King Edward IV. The Wars of the Roses are finally over, but Richard's tragic fall serves as a reminder of the consequences of unbridled ambitions. Now let's discuss the themes in details. The first one is the corruption of power. Richard's rise to power is a study of how ambition can corrupt a person's soul. At first, his actions seem strategic. But as he murders, betrays, and manipulates, he becomes increasingly paranoid and isolated. The more Richard gains, the more he loses his humanity. Shakespeare uses Richard to warn audiences about the dangers of unchecked ambition and how the pursuit of power can destroy a person even as it gives them the world. The second one is fate versus free will. Here's a question. Is Richard a product of his fate, born with a physical deformity that isolates him and sets him on his dark path, or does he choose to become a villain? This central question underlies much of the play. While Richard's deformity could be seen as a symbol of his inner corruption, the play also explores the role of free will. Richard makes deliberate choices, manipulating and murdering to achieve his goals. But his eventual downfall feels almost inevitable. The tension between fate and free will is a central theme that keeps the audience questioning the nature of Richard's evil. The third one is appearance versus reality. Richard's deformity is often used to symbolize his inner corruption. He speaks of his physical appearance as a barrier to being loved or respected, yet he compensates for this by using his intelligence and charm. He deceives everyone around him, appearing harmless and loyal while plotting to murder those who stand in his way. This theme of appearance versus reality challenges the audience to question what they see and hear, just as Richard manipulates those around him into seeing him as a benevolent ruler rather than a tyrant. The next theme is the role of women. Although women in Richard III are largely powerless within a patriarchal society, they are crucial in highlighting Richard's villainy. Characters like Lady Anne, Queen Elizabeth, and Queen Margaret express moral outrage and grief over Richard's action. Lady Anne's emotional journey from hatred to reluctant marriage with Richard exemplifies the manipulation he employs, while Queen Elizabeth's eventual support of Henry Tudor represents a woman's resistance against a tyrant. Shakespeare uses these characters to provide a contrast to Richard's cold ambition and to demonstrate how the women in the play are often victims of his malevolent actions. The fifth theme is conscience and guilt. One of the most striking aspects of Richard's character is his lack of conscience, especially in the earlier acts. However, as the ghosts of his victims appear to him in Act 5, it becomes clear that Richard is not immune to guilt. The supernatural visions of the people he has killed torment him, symbolizing his psychological unraveling. Even though Richard initially seems invincible, his mental collapse reveals that guilt is inescapable. The sixth point is divine justice. Richard's downfall is portrayed as divine retribution for his sins. His reign, marked by murder and treachery, ultimately cannot withstand the forces of divine justice. The ghosts of his victims curse him, while the arrival of Henry Tudor signifies the triumph of right over wrong. Shakespeare uses Richard's fall to reinforce the Elizabethan belief in divine intervention, showing that tyranny and evil will ultimately be punished. Richard III continues to captivate audience because of its complex exploration of power, ambition, and human nature. Richard's character, a blend of intelligence, charisma, and cruelty, make him one of Shakespeare's most memorable villains. His tragic fall, driven by his own actions and ambition, serves as a timeless reminder of the dangers of unchecked power. Therefore, Shakespeare's brilliant plotting, rich characterizations, and exploration of themes such as fate, free will, and divine justice ensure that Richard III remains one of the most enduring plays in the Shakespearean canon. With this, I end Richard III. If you think that this video has helped you in any way or the other, do like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.